Okay. So, um, your question is about fear.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Basically, we can say that fear is the most basic emotion. It's the most basic feeling that we have.
Mm-hmm.
That in fact, in Buddhism, or let us say in the Pali language, the Buddha uses the word for feeling, which is Vedana, in two different ways. We use it in the way of, first off, an initial kind of feeling, and then we use it as the more encompassing feeling, which we would call an emotion. In that regard, fear is an emotion that comes from a more basic feeling. And that most basic feeling at the bottom level, the let us say the triggers that we have in the mind, like the example is a gun, or better still, an example of a light and a light switch. That the anger is like the light that is turned on, but the switch is the emotion that started it, or not the emotion, but the feeling. So there's two kinds of basic kinds of feelings. Actually, there's four, and we'll get into it. Um, One is the feeling of liking, and one is the feeling of not liking. Basically, what it is it's the same feeling, and it matters as to which direction that it goes. It's like a vector. It can go in a positive direction or it can go in a negative direction. And so if it's in a positive direction, that means we like it. But that often leads to the ignorance of wanting it. Just because we like it doesn't mean that we want it. Many millions of people can go through a museum, let's say the Louvre, and see the Mona Lisa, and everybody likes it. But a few people in that crowd want it. Some of them are billionaires and they want to buy it, and they know that they can't because the French government is not going to sell it. Others want to steal it. Others plot to gain control of the French government so that they can own the painting. You see the mentality that's going in that, okay? So there's a difference between liking something and wanting it. And generally, humans are pretty wise to the point of knowing that they do like something, but that they cannot have it and own it. But most of the time, for small things, we recognize that we want things that are not appropriate for us to want. So oftentimes, when we want things and we can't have it, or we want things and it takes an awful lot of work and perhaps hurting a lot of people, then that's the kind of wanting that leads to dukkha. In fact, almost all wanting leads to dukkha. I can like it. I can like that picture in the gallery and then pass on and go like another one. Or I
Mm-hmm.
can stand there and plot that I'm going to try to get it. So this is one kind of feeling, and that is at the very basic level of wanting things and trying to get them because of that little feeling inside of just liking it. But then on the other side, when we don't like something, that that means that we're trying to get rid of it. And it's generally that feeling of not liking and the wanting to get rid of it that raises up the fear of or the emotion of fear.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, in the sense of I'm afraid that I can't get rid of it, or I'm afraid that I can't have what I want, or I'm afraid that it's going to come and hurt me. I'm afraid that it'll do something that I don't want it to do, etc., like that. You see where we're coming from. All right. Now, that we understand that that sequence is kind of like a slippery slope. Once we get into liking and not liking, it's an easy path to go from not liking to wanting to get rid of it. to being afraid of it.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Would you consider fear and aversion the same thing?
They're related in the sense that they're going off in the same negative direction. So they are related, but they are not exactly the same thing because the experience of it is different. Disgust and aversion and fear are, disgust, aversion, and anger are different than fear. But fear is the basic foundation of that. And underlying that basic foundation of fear is the niggle or the tiny little emotion of liking and not liking. Now, that basic fear emotion actually is the most basic of all feelings, in the sense that you either feel secure or you feel insecure. This is the basic emotion, all at the bottom line of it all. And that it comes out of what you've heard in high school, I think, is what is called the self-preservation instinct. Actually, a better word to call it would not be the self-preservation instinct, but the organism's protection system, the organism's protective instinct. So Keyshawn is calling. Are we going to add him to the call?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Dave, Robert.
Howdy.
Robert, how's it going? Hey, Dhammarato.
Good. How are you? Good to see you.
Hello, guys. You're welcome to join the call. We're talking about fear.
I'm
Dhammarato,
Anya.
I just want to. Oh, hi, Anya. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you
I'm
too.
Keyshawn.
Keyshawn, nice to meet you.
I wanted to ask you, Dhammarato, if you wanted to join this 10 o'clock call that we set up with a number of the students here
Yeah,
that you didn't get an invite to, but if you wanted to join that, you could. Or if you want us to just have like maybe it'd be good to have like a student only thing, but I just figured maybe you'd be interested in joining. That'd be cool.
Well, I'm not sure how long this call will last.
Oh, okay. Oh, we're doing a video right now, so okay.
Okay. So let's go ahead and do this, and we'll play that one by ear. Do you want to stay on this call or go off? And I don't even know what call you're talking about. So with the information that I have at this moment, I can't join it.
Well, I can send you the invite if you'd like to join. It's at like 10 o'clock, where it's just Robert, well, this Robert, and then the Chicago Robert, and then I think Dan is also going to join that one too.
Okay. All right. Send me the link on Skype.
Okay.
Cool. Could Anya join us as well?
I'm here. Eddie, I will hang out.
All are welcome.
Okay, great. We could all just migrate after this, but anyway,
I'll jump here and leave you guys to it.
All right.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. So we had started talking about fear as an emotion that is it's actually, we could go so far as to say that these emotions are ways that we spend time. Our emotions are the way that we will spend a mind moment. But there are other ways to spend mind moments. One of the ways to spend a mind moment is what we would call discursive thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Another kind of mind moment that we could spend would be in observation, or actually taking data in from the senses. And another way that we spend mind moments is in communications. And one of the ways that parts of the mind communicate is with emotions. basically what we're talking about is the structure of the human brain from neuroscience fits exactly with the structure of the mind that Freud and the Buddha and Eric Berne spoke about. Eric Berne has the simplest way of understanding it when he talks about it in the sense of the parent, the adult, and the child. The child within, the psychologists talk about, is basically the most primitive part of the brain. It's the part of the brain that's the most developed when an infant is born. And that is what is called the reptilian brain, and it's the anterior cortex. And the anterior part of the cortex of the brain that humans have is very similar to that in say an alligator. And so that's why they call it the reptilian brain, is because of the way that it's shaped. That's how a lot of the brain parts got named, is because of the way that they're shaped, look like something else. And so the midsection of the brain we call the temporal lobe. And this is the part of the brain that gives us language. And this is what Freud calls the superego. And this is what the Buddha talked about in the sense of attachments to rites, rules, and rituals of the way that things should be. In other words, the parent is telling the child what to do. And then the child goes around rebelling from it. And the child rebels and has a language. And the language of the child is the language of emotions, the language of feelings. To where the language of the superego is the language of language, in the sense of talking to ourselves, vocalizations. We can also call it concepts and conceptualizations. And all of this stuff is stored. The third part of the mind, the adult ego state, is what Berne calls it. And that this is what we refer to then as the observer or the knower, or that which makes you human, the ability to connect the dots. And the language of the frontal cortex is the language of observation, to see clearly what's happening. So these are the three languages. We have chatter, we have feelings, and we have the ability to see clearly. That part to see clearly, we can think of it as kind of a supercomputer, in the sense that not only is it the highest part of the human mind and makes us human, that the animals don't have this supercomputer, but another way of thinking of the supercomputer is it uses a lot of energy. Normally, it uses so much energy that the other parts of the mind, like a reptilian part, which for most people is the boss, will shut down the frontal cortex. One of the ways of doing that shutdown is by depriving it of oxygen, which means if we're breathing in a shallow way, then the frontal cortex is shut down and we're no longer to see things clearly, which means that now we operate out of ignorance, which means that we're going to operate out of habit, which means that when something goes bump in the night, instead of observing what it was and figuring out what it was, we just simply jump immediately into fear without doing the processing necessary to find out whether this bump in the night was fearful or not. And so we go around with having an awful lot of false positives that is actually, we can call it an instinctual reaction. We react with instinct, and the instinct of the self-preservation is fear. And that's the basic one. We can talk about the rest of the instincts later, because it's actually all of them have their own individual ways of creating dukkha. But fear is the one that is the most primary. This is why the Buddha was so big on becoming fearless, is to stop having fears, especially the fears that are generated from false positives. And almost all of our fear is a false positive. For instance, each one of you are in an environment that looks pretty safe. I do not see any gorillas behind you. I do not see any crocodiles eating anybody's leg. There's nothing to fear here. And by observation, we can see that there's nothing to fear, but we have to do that observation. We have to open our eyes, or better still, we have to wake up and see what's going on. If we don't wake up and see what's going on, then we will just naturally continue operating off of an old pattern. It's sort of like an airliner with an automatic pilot. While the captain puts the automatic pilot on, he can take a rest, he can relax, he can even take a nap. And the automatic pilot will continue to fly the plane with a particular heading, a particular speed, a particular yaw, a particular pitch, a particular altitude, a particular heading, all of that kind of stuff. And the automatic pilot will continue to take that plane in that particular direction, even if it takes the plane into the side of a mountain or into a thunderstorm. That's why we need to put the pilot back in the cockpit, so that we can turn that automatic pilot off and get the pilot to fly the plane so that the pilot can fly it out of danger. However, once the pilot takes over the plane, he's got to fly it now. We can't allow the automatic pilot to do it. So now the pilot has to have the altitude and the pitch and the yaw and all of that kind of stuff under his control. So basically, we were born with an automatic pilot. It's part of our DNA. It's our instinctual way of doing things. But if we lived by instinct alone, that meant that we can only handle things in a very, very primitive style, the way that things were 600,000 years ago. That alligators who were millions of years old have been successful, and sharks and things like that, because they had all of the DNA or all of the instincts good enough to handle their environment. Humans have changed their environment to make the environment safe, so that the humans don't have to be at war and defending themselves all the time. So we have made a fairly safe environment that we call civilization. Except that even though the civilization is relatively safe, the humans still don't feel safe. We still feel unsafe the way that we started out, and that we haven't grown up yet.
Question: how do we grow up and feel safe? How do we
Well,
train
we're
them?
getting there. We're going in that direction. So we got to get the basic understanding of what's going on first. When you understand basically that what's going on is that we become afraid as adults because we talk ourselves into it, rather than seeing what's really going on. And what do? We talk ourselves into being afraid because of the habits that we're in the sense of the habit patterns. So the ego state of the child is basic programming, and the parent ego state is the learned behavior that we learned from our parents when we were children. The children become socialized, but they become socialized with both the carrot and the stick, which means that society punishes children, sometimes without words, just a glance, sometimes with words, and sometimes with sticks, and sometimes with threats. But the whole point is to make the child afraid so that he will behave himself and become socialized. So in fact, the way that children are raised, we keep the fear going, even though the child is in a safe environment, in order for the child to not be a vagabond or a ruffian or a barbarian or any of those kinds of words that we use for children who will not do what they're told to do. We threaten the child into getting the child to do what he's supposed to do according to the parents. And the parents have all the tools that come from the past. We can threaten the child with a beating, or we can threaten the child with hell damnation. There's all kinds of ways that we can threaten the child to make the child feel like that it would be inconvenient to break the rules, even though keeping the rules, I don't want to do it. And so every child grows up with a complex, and the older we get, the more firm that complex gets set in motion. And what is that complex? The complex of repeating a rule to ourselves: you want to do this. And then the child rebels against that, saying, I don't want to. The Buddha calls this the woeful state of being an animal. What are animals? Animals go along to get along. Now, we're not talking about wild animals in the wild. We're talking about domesticated animals that are put to work.
Mm-hmm.
Draft animals. And so we train our children to grow up and be draft animals, and the draft animal children grow up to resent it, but also they continue to be fearful of the punishment that they will receive if they rebel against the authority. So we can say then that this parent ego state that is labeled as parent by Freud, we could also call it the authoritarian part of our nature. And that the language that this authoritarian speaks is the language of words. So we go around giving ourselves things to do. One of my recent favorites is the guy is watching YouTube, watching a video, and he has the thought, you ought to be meditating, or I ought to be meditating. You hear that word ought, you should meditate. That's a key word there. That oughts and that shoulds means that it's coming out of this authoritarian parent ego state. And then the child inside says, I want to watch YouTube. I don't want to meditate right now. And then the parent will say, you should meditate. If you don't meditate, you're going to go to hell. And then the child says, okay, I don't really want to go to hell. I'm really afraid to go to hell, but I don't want to meditate. All right. So you see that people with that kind of dialogue inside work themselves up into inappropriate feelings because we're repeating a set of rules or instructions that come from stories. And so basically what we learn is we learn this, you want to, or you should do this. And the word this then is substituted with whatever's going on right now. So if somebody's practicing meditation, starting to meditate, then that parent will come in, you should meditate.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can think about, you should do your income taxes. And then people say, I don't want to do my income taxes. But then the parent will say, if you don't do your income taxes, all kinds of terrible things will happen. And now here comes the fear. I don't want to do the income taxes. And so I've got this resentment and this guilt built up. And now the next thing that happens is putting fear in the next mind moment, piling on. This is how the mind works. And waking up to that is the key. Waking up to to get the frontal cortex in gear and have it to start to observe this kind of dialogue that's happening under the table. Absent-mindedly is, in fact, the best way to talk about it. But when you really start observing the thoughts that you have, you can see how many times you're giving yourselves orders that you don't want to obey. And so the same dialogue that happens in between your actual parents when you were a child and that child hears all of that dialogue, remembers it all, and then later repeats it. That this is, in fact, how we become socialized. We become socialized by remembering all the stuff that society has told us. And then we continue to repeat all of that stuff over and over again. Sometimes it's even conflicting. And when it's in conflict, oh, you've got to go west. No, you got to go east. No, you've got to go west. That leaves the child both confused and afraid. That in fact, part of that mechanism that's built in is that when we become confused or when there is doubt, fear arises naturally. We call it the fear of the unknown. It's so well known, it's so well part of psychology that everybody experiences it, to the point when we talk about the fear of unknown, everybody understands. Here's the point. If someone is coming down the road and you do not know what it is or who it is, or you don't know how they're dressed yet because it's at such a distance, we become curious. We want to know, is this man or male or female? Is it an old man or a young man? Is it an old woman or a young woman? Are they carrying anything? How are they dressed? We want to know these things because it might be dangerous. Now, 600,000 years ago, it might be dangerous. In our modern society, the likelihood of it being dangerous is very, very low, but that mechanism still goes into play. Who is that? What do they want? Are they dangerous or not? This happens with everything that we don't know. So part of the spiritual path is learning to become comfortable and happy, even if we don't know. Even if we don't know, we can still be okay, because we can recognize that what we do know is all right, and that we can forget about that which we don't know. Well, how do we forget about it? Okay, go ahead.
There was a book I read recently with a title you would really like. It's called The Wisdom of No Escape.
Yeah, okay. There is no escape. For some things. But one of the things that we can escape is the old habits that used to keep us in prison. That in fact, this feeling of no escape, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa calls it the prison of life. Now, he's playing on words there. When he's saying that, he's not saying that life itself is a prison, but rather that we imprison life to keep it safe, where in fact it was safe without being in prison. That in fact, prison itself is often dangerous. And so what we're practicing with Anapanasati is the practice of, number one, sati is to wake up, and to wake up that frontal cortex. And we want to do that by taking some deep breaths, getting the body oxygenated, cleaning the carbon dioxide that's been building up in the lungs, and cleaning it out. That we can function better when the mind is clean, when the blood's got very little carbon dioxide and a whole lot of oxygen in it, then the body feels really vibrantly alive and healthy. But we live in more or less a shutdown mode. We live in a shutdown mode because of, you probably heard of the two words together, fight and flight. Okay. The fight and flight mechanism is the response to fear. In the old days, when we were dealing with wild animals and all we had was a spear, we either had to fight that animal to stay alive or we had to run away from it. And so a lot of our physiology, including the way that the pineal glands, the pituitary glands, and the adrenaline glands operate, pumps adrenaline and cortisol into the blood to prepare us for fight or flight. And all you're doing is sitting at your desk looking at your income tax. And there's no, you can't fight that piece of paper and you can't run away from it. There is no flight and there's no fight. But 600,000 years ago, we developed into humans with that fight or flight complex. And we got it from the lower animals. Dogs have it. In fact, it's very interesting. We're going to add a third ingredient, and that is before the fight or flight happens, we go into what is called a freeze. The example of that is that the two guys are standing there and they are looking out in the distance and they see only 100 yards away a rhinoceros. Immediately they freeze. Why? Because the guy who is going to run away from the rhinoceros is going to catch the rhinoceros's attention, and the rhinoceros is going to run him down and kill him. The guy who froze and stood in place, the rhinoceros can't see him, is not going to chase him. Okay, so that freeze option gets built into our genes because it's part of the survival instinct. And that freeze then, the guy who did freeze and followed his instincts survived, and the guy who ran away from the rhinoceros is dead. We don't have to deal with his genes. But we do have to deal with the genes of the guy who did survive long enough to procreate. And now we have that freeze built in. What is the freeze? Number one issue of freezing is to stop breathing. And we hold our breath when we're thinking of fearful things. So the wake-up process, one of the things that we must wake up to is to start breathing well, especially when we don't want to breathe well because we're operating under the freeze. Meanwhile, during that freeze moment, the body is pumping out adrenaline, getting us ready for fight or flight, and there's no place to fly and there's no thing to fight. What we're left with is what we normally refer to in our society as anxiety. Anxiety is extra adrenaline in the system. How are we going to get rid of that adrenaline that we don't need? Is to breathe it out, because adrenaline does break down. It breaks down into very tiny amino acids that stay in the blood, or we can breathe them out if we're breathing correctly. But the question is, how did that fight and flight chemicals get into the body anyway? Because the frontal cortex did not see an actual gorilla or an actual rhinoceros. We thought of one. We had a mental concoction. This is something that most animals cannot do, but humans do it. We concoct our own gorillas. And then we become afraid of them. And then we are stuck because we are frozen in fear, getting ready to fight or to flee. And we can't do it because there's nothing to flee from, because everything is happening within one's own mind. So this is the state that we get ourselves into. We get ourselves fearful when there's nothing to be afraid of. So what is important is to wake up. This is sati. Number one, to wake up. Number two is to look at the kind of thoughts that we're having. Are we having thoughts of gorillas? Are we having thoughts of rhinoceroses? Are we having thoughts of doing our taxes? Are we having thoughts of writing that email to the boss? Are we having thoughts of, I've got to finish that argument with Aunt Susie? Are we having thoughts of trying to straighten other people out? If we are having those kind of thoughts, then those kind of thoughts are unwholesome. They're basically thoughts about having to do something we don't want to do. We don't want to do the taxes, but we're thinking about it anyway. And we're also thinking about, we have to think about the things to get us to do the taxes, even though we don't want to do the taxes. And so what do? We use the same tactics that our parents used with us. We learned this from in our childhood from our parents. And what is that? We threaten you. Oh, if you don't do your taxes, blah, blah is going to happen. And now the child feels fear. So what we're actually looking at is that your fear, you talk yourself into it. Which means that you can talk yourself out of it if you are sharp and alert and remember and actually observe the fact that in this present moment, there are no alligators. Even if you're at the riverside, there's still no alligators in that river. And they're certainly not crawling out of the river onto the shore to grab your leg. They're not there, okay? And when we take a look around and recognize there's no alligators, there's no IRS agents, there's no cops, there's no SWAT team, there are no mafia bosses, and there are no mommies. All of that's in one's own head, and we can throw that stuff out and put a nurturing guardian in there instead. And let that parent ego state be a nurturing guardian who, and then the observation part of the mind will guide the dialogue. Look, there's no alligators. Everything is safe here. Take a deep breath and relax. There's no place to go and nothing to do, and everything is okay. We can literally talk ourselves into feeling bad, feeling afraid. It's time to talk ourselves into feeling good. This is the basic teachings of the Buddha. This is Anapanasati. That in fact, what I'm talking of here is the Eightfold Noble Path. Number one, sati, to wake up. Number two, look at what you're doing. Look at the kind of thoughts that you're having. And then number three is to take the right effort to change those thoughts into something that's wholesome. When we're having thoughts that bring up fear, we can change those thoughts into thoughts that everything is okay. I can handle that. Things are fearless. Let's not do it right now. Let's get our mind in a really good state, and then we'll do the income taxes. Don't do your income taxes when you're feeling bad. Do your income taxes when you're feeling really good. The question is, how can you get yourself feeling really good if you're thinking about doing your income taxes? Better to not think about income taxes.
I have an observation, and it just
All right.
dawned on me. So I'm sitting on this little like wooden bridge, right, above the water, and all that I'm thinking about right now, I've been thinking, is that I'm gonna drop this phone in the water. And it just was so natural, and I just realized it that it was my thing. It was my thought.
Good observation. So the right thing to do is to say, if that's the case, then why don't I take 10 steps back? So if I drop the phone, I'll drop it on the ground and I don't have to drop it in the water.
Right.
Or I could just set the phone in my lap or something, turn the phone off, and sit here and enjoy life.
No, I want to train myself I don't know what I'm doing with myself. This is just a thought that I'm like, no, I'm okay. I'll be okay. Or, oh, damn. It's just so. eh, Keep
It's
going.
very simple. The teachings of the Buddha are very simple, but the problem is that people fail to remember to do it when they need it the most. That in fact, thinking about dropping your phone in the water is probably a 5-minute wake-up call to the fact that you're about to drop your phone in the water. All
Yeah.
right. So we have to then heed these warnings easily, comfortably, and happily rather than becoming worried. So dropping my phone in the water would be a thought that says, okay, let's move that out of the way. And then once we've moved the phone out of the way, there's no problem anymore. So now I don't have to have that thought. But if you sit there like the water and have the thought, my phone will fall in the water, and we sit there, then that thought's going to come back again, isn't it?
Oh,
Over
yeah.
and over and over again. And every time we have that thought, we're going to get a little bit more afraid. We're pumping up the adrenaline.
Yeah.
Okay. That one little thought will give one little drip of adrenaline. Two little thoughts will give two little drips of adrenaline. Constant thoughts will give constant drips of adrenaline. This is one of the reasons why an example of that would be the repair of a complex piece of equipment like a computer. That we want to take the computer to a technician because he doesn't really care whether he fixes your computer or not. If he can't fix your computer, he'll just throw it over in the corner, and when you come by, he'll just tell you, I can't fix it. And that's it. But if you're trying to fix your own computer, it's almost like it's a life and death issue. And so we become greatly fearful, and it's very difficult to repair our computer because we're so afraid. But if we don't give a flying rip and we're just having fun playing with the computer, then we're more than likely going to be able to fix it. But if we're afraid we can't fix it, guess what? We can't. So this is the place where fear comes from in our society. Now, there are times when there is real danger. This is where wisdom would come in. I'm seeing an incoming call from something called the Sangha. What's happening? Everybody off the
I
air.
don't know. There's a. What do we need? Hold and accept?
Robert.
Robert, help us.
Hey guys, do you want to migrate over to the other call?
I don't know what to do. Both of you are asking you to tell us what to do. There's something called Sangha that's coming in.
Got it. So I think we should migrate over to the Sangha call. We can
I
continue.
don't know what that means.
So it's a call with a few other people on it that all wanted to call you at.
They're calling us right now.
Yes, I think we got to
We
answer
missed
that.
So,
Okay. Now they're
accept.
gone.
Oh, so do you see the Sangha thing on the left?
Yes, I saw it, and you wouldn't answer my question. What do we do with this?
Just press join call. Press the green button. See how it says join call?
Well,
You guys see
anyway,
that?
that's gone now. I tell you what, let's forget about that call and let's finish what we're talking about.
Okay. I'm just gonna ask them to call again. Just 1 second. But yeah, we can finish like right over there maybe.
Okay, let's do this. Who's that?
I think that's
I
them. I
have a
think that's
new incoming
Sangha.
call from something called the Sangha.
Yeah, so join call. Press join call or accept.
No, I don't want to accept it.
Then put decline.
Okay.
I
Okay.
don't. Okay, all right. So I've lost your signal, or
Okay.
your video.
Now, can you see us now?
Okay, now we're back. Okay. Wow, this video is going to need a lot of
What was
editing.
that? What was this about? Was there a lot of fear right here?
Pardon?
Was there a lot of fear that we're not accepting other people into our call and we're being selfish? No, I'm just kidding.
No, you weren't. Just after you said it, you recognized that it would ought to be.
I
So
feel like we're
anyway,
not nice. We're taking over Dhammarato's time.
well, my only concern is that Patrick will have to edit this video to get all of this stuff out of it.
Oh, you mean, yeah, later? Yeah.
Yeah, because well, either that or we'll just throw the video out and not put it on at all. So we were basically getting into how to practice the Eightfold Noble Path, which Anna, you and I haven't really talked about much.
No.
And that is, hello, Keyshawn. We're still in the middle of what we're doing here.
We can.
So,
do you want to merge it
so
up
we're
or?
going to let that call go.
Okay. Well, thanks for the invite. Am I supposed to join this one? I mean, we could, or do you guys want to finish up a particular topic here?
Yes, I want to finish this particular topic because it's Anna's question and I want to get an answer to it for her so that she can get some resolution. So
Well, I have no
we'll see you guys at another day.
of interrupting. So
Pardon?
I have no intention of interrupting. You guys can continue on.
All
Should I
righty.
stay or should I go?
Up to you.
Just stay.
I
Stay
mean,
with us.
I got there. Here's
Yeah,
something
stay,
that's kind of
stay.
confusing is that we got something called the Sangha was calling in on our Skype here, and I don't know what that was.
Well, you have a lot of fans now, Dhammarato. We got to do something about expansion. Now that you're so popular, everybody's trying to get a hold of you.
The solution to that is take a hike, which I'm planning on. I've already discussed it with Keyshawn.
Don't worry, it's only two guys calling. Don't give them that much. Don't gas them up too much.
No, I think my work is done here.
I'm just kidding.
If people can't get something out of 900 videos, what's the point of jawboning on?
The one uploaded with Robert today was really good. I liked it a lot. But anyways.
Cool. Do we want to add Dhammadasa in here and then continue on with Anya, but just to get the whole gang in? Maybe Keyshawn, you can add him, and then okay. So Dhammarato, take it away. Maybe you shouldn't have it be like a whole party. You know, it is kind of a party at this point, but yeah, we just got to make sure it's not a pity party. You know.
Yeah. If you want me to add him in, I can. I'll tell him to wait.
Okay. All right. So, at this point, let's start talking about the Dhamma again. We were talking about the issue of fear and the fact that we become afraid because we talk ourselves into it, and we talk ourselves into it with the language that we learned when we were children. And the language that we learned when we were children, we operated out of an instinct. Children operate almost completely out of instinct. And the socialization of children to turn them from barbarians into members of our society is done in a very haphazard way, so that the child winds up not having a joyful adulthood, but it has a painful adulthood with a lot of rules, etc., like that, that is has very little joy in it. And that almost all of the joy that we learned when we were childhood was not because somebody just wanted to give us something nice. That adults don't do things for children. The child has to earn it. We have to earn the praise. Our whole society is built upon that issue of earning your joy.
Mhm.
And so you start off in a natural position, and we're talking about natural not in the sense of complete instincts. Just the instincts are there as the basic programming, so that the way that we're trained as children, which is actually nurture, becomes nature over time. And the way that that happens is that DNA actually gets modified. That it's not true that DNA is set at the time of conception. The way that most people think about it is that mommy's genes and daddy's genes get together, and that's called conception. And those genes sit there and they boil and they churn, and then 9 months later, out pops me. Well, it's not so simple as that, because there are some genes that are regulatory genes and others are operational genes, and the regulatory genes turn on and off slowly over time, so that there's some things that can happen right before a child is born that set the genes in a certain way, so that the child will be that way his whole life. And so there's also genes that happened right after we're born, and those genes get set in a certain way. This is what Freud refers to as developmental psychology, but they didn't know until recently that this stuff goes all the way down to the fact that our genes get set. An example of that would be the abandonment issue. There is a thing called an abandonment issue. It doesn't happen very often. We have, all of us have it a little bit, but the big one will happen when the child is either never meets his own biological mother or is separated from his biological mother in early childhood development, like within 3 months. So this whole issue of adopting children, the adopted children have to be extra special nourished, because they're having a different childhood than others, especially if that child is taken away from the mommy in the hospital because she doesn't want it, put in some sort of foster care for a while, and then adoptive parents come and adopt the child. And you can see how that disruption then causes issues. Another issue would be that the child is abandoned and put into a garbage dump, and then somebody later finds that child. Okay, these kind of abandonment issues have very heavy impacts upon the actual gene structure that the infant is putting together. Because I've worked with people who had abandonment issues, and they have to be continuously reassured. A really good example of that is that the newly married girl with an abandonment issue, whenever her new husband goes off to work in the mornings, she will have a fight with him. Just 5 minutes before he's out the door, that's when she'll explode. She'll get him involved in a fight because she wants to stay there. He will eventually have to go to work. He will tear himself away from this fight that he's having with his wife, and then the wife feels completely depressed. For her, it would be better to cling to him, even in an argument, than to have him to go off. And so the right thing for him to do is to say, I will be back soon. You'll be okay. Everything's going to be all right. In other words, he has to give her the very kinds of nurturing thoughts that she should have been giving herself. And instead, she's giving herself terrified thoughts of, oh no, what's going to happen when I'm alone again? Okay, so that fear of being alone always has to do with some sort of early abandonment issue, and some people get it really heavy big time. There's other things about these genes, but the important thing to recognize that a lot of stuff happens in childhood that sets us up for having a miserable adulthood, which means that we've got to work really, really hard, if you want to talk about it in losers' terms, to get over this. Another way of talking about it, though, is in winners' terms, is repetition, repetition, repetition. We have to keep nurturing ourselves and keep reassuring ourselves and keep lifting ourselves up, because our natural position is to go back into the traumas of childhood. Not that we go back and start wearing diapers again, but we feel like we ought to. And so it's the mind that we need to start repeating over and over again. Everything is okay. Everything is fine. We wake up and recognize there really are no alligators or crocodiles or IRS agents or SWAT teams or anything else here right now. In this moment, everything is okay. Keep reassuring yourself over and over again. Everything right here, right now is okay. Once you continue to tell yourself that with repetition, you begin to start believing it. We start believing it slowly because it's gone against the grain of everything else we've been telling ourselves, but we start believing it slowly because it's real. We can observe, we can see. We do not have to have an argument with ourselves. There's no doubt about it. Things really are safe. And because things really are safe, we don't have to feel like that they're not safe, that we've actually felt unsafe because we've talked ourselves into it. So we have to talk ourselves out of it. And this is done over and over and over again. This is what meditation is really all about, is to continuously practicing wholesome things. And while we're practicing wholesome things, we're intentionally practicing to not have unwholesome things in the mind. And once we get into the habit of having wholesome things and more wholesome things and more wholesome things in the mind, we begin to trust that we can have wholesome things in the mind. That trusting is also, we can call it confidence. The Pali word is shraddha or sada, and that is confidence. If you continue to repeat the same thing over and over and over and over again, it becomes kind of natural for us. Even drumming our fingers. For an infant, they can't drum fingers. We can get used to it, though, so that we can sit there and just drum and drum and drum and drum and drum and drum, and then it becomes almost automatic. We don't have to think about it anymore. Okay? So what we're talking about here is we begin to start drumming into the mind wholesome thoughts. Wholesome thoughts that are real thoughts, that are real reality is wholesome. This is not aspirational thinking. You've heard aspirations, and there's, a whole library full of books that are called self-help books. It's a whole genre. And when people are reading the book, they're thinking about the book. They're saying these ideas are really good in this book. But when they read the book and finish it and put it back on the bookshelf, they stop practicing. And therefore, everything that they read in the book has only minimal amount of influence on them. Another problem with the books are often that the good advice that the book has is not the advice that the individual needs to have. That's when they become aspirational. In other words, we begin to, with aspirational thoughts, think about things that are not real. They're actually just conceptualizations. An example of that is the teenage girl who is standing in front of the mirror in the morning before she goes to school saying, "I'm beautiful. I'm the most gorgeous chick in school. All the boys really love me." And she tells herself those aspirations, and then she walks out the door and she forgets all about it, because she really didn't believe it in the first place. So what we need to do is to not give ourselves aspirations which are false, nor allowing the mind to stay in the misery that it has gotten into the habit of manufacturing, which is also false, and start living in the present moment, because only this present moment is real. And this present moment, for almost everyone that I've ever met, this present moment is safe. The number of actual minutes that you've been in danger in your life is probably under 1,000 minutes. And look how many minutes you've been alive, millions of minutes, and only 1,000 of them or so you were in actually danger. But how many of those minutes that you've had, you felt fear as if there was some danger?
Too
And
many.
then by that, you can recognize how out of kilter this fear mechanism is. There are so many false positives.
1,000 feels high.
Exactly. Thousands and thousands and thousands of thoughts we will have that give us danger. Thousands and thousands of thoughts will give us feelings of danger, and not one of them was true. Danger, danger everywhere, and not a drop of it will harm me.
So, Dhammarato, what would be the example of a good thought when you start thinking, or when fear comes up? What?
The Buddha recommended one. I've already given you several in this conversation, but now that you're asking, we can go back and start looking at that. You're
Mhm.
basically asking the question of, well, what's a wholesome thought?
Yeah.
The answer to that really is the answer that that's a skill to be developed. You're asking that question because at the level of unskilled, you don't know how to answer that question. But as you practice, you will gain skill. In other words, when you start examining your thoughts, you will start deciding which thoughts are wholesome and which thoughts are not wholesome. So asking me that question is kind of irrelevant. I'm irrelevant here. Reminds me of a song, but never mind. The point is that you're going to have to figure that out for yourself, but there are some tools and some examples that we can use to get you started. One example would be most of the kinds of thoughts that we have, the beginner will see those thoughts as wholesome because he sees the advantage or the gratification. The Buddha talks about gratification, danger, and escape. So long as we only see the gratification in those thoughts and do not see the dangers in them, then we do not see that they're unwholesome. And because of that, we have no way of even thinking about or plotting an escape from having those kinds of thoughts. But once we start seeing the dangers in the thought, then we can say that thought is dangerous. Let's not have that thought. Let's find another kind of thought we can have that we can find gratification in. All right. And a lot of people will say, well, thoughts of I've got to go do my taxes is a wholesome thought, because if I don't do the taxes, I'm going to get into great big trouble. And so people will start saying then that having thoughts about doing the taxes is a wholesome thought because it's going to keep me out of trouble. The answer is no, having that thought got us into trouble because now we're uptight and anxious about doing the income taxes, and we're not even doing the income taxes. We're just sitting here worried about the income taxes. And sitting and worried about income taxes is not doing income taxes, and therefore that's not wholesome. That the better thing to do is to get ourselves into a really, really good state that's got plenty of right attitude built into it. Hot diggity dog, I can get those income taxes done. I'm ready to do it. It's almost like pumping yourself up, like the coaches do before the football team. You know, just before the guys go out, or maybe it's at halftime and they're in their locker, and then the coach gives them a pep talk, right? You guys could do this. Go out on the field. You're ready to go. Everything is going to be all right. You guys did a really good touchdown. You can do it again and again and again. Now let's go. And they all go to the door, and the door's locked. Well, that's how we live our lives, except we don't even bother to pump us up. The way that we normally have a pep talk at halftime within our own mind is, gosh, this first half was so much work and so much trouble. I don't even think we can get through the second half. And that's the kind of coaching we do for ourselves. And so naturally, we're going to go out on the field miserably rather than all pumped up. What we need to do is to get ourselves ready to do anything that we're going to do. From time to time, I use a Christian passage that says, whatever thy hand findeth to do, do with all thy heart, all thy strength, and all thy mind. In other words, put your mind into it. Most of the stuff that we do half-heartedly. Most of the stuff we do because we're supposed to do it. We don't put our hearts into it at all. This
Got
is
a
the
question.
attitude that we live our lives with. Yes, go ahead, Robert.
So would right attitude be, or would one example of it in, say, this tax situation be saying, you know, it'll be so nice to do my taxes. That's going to be great when that happens.
Oh,
You know, I
well, it'll
can't
feel
wait.
really good when they're finished. Wow, what a relief
Yeah,
that's going to be.
yeah,
I
that's
can
going to
do
be
that.
so great. Yeah.
Mhm.
There we go. And also I'm curious as well, Anya, do you have a specific fear that has been like a big one for you lately? Because you asked like,
Fear of failure.
Well, that's just a whole lot of little fears. That's not a big one.
Yeah, but it's like a composition of them all.
Hmm. Well, why don't you just allow yourself to fail?
Why don't I?
Yeah, I'm a huge failure. I love it. Man, I'm the best screw up you ever saw.
It's hard to believe.
Well, I can either feel bad about my screw ups or I can feel good about it, but screwing up is part of life. They've got a different word for it rather than screwing up or failure. They call it education.
Yeah.
They call it education. Now, there's two kinds of education. There is one kind of education. If at first you don't succeed, try again, and that's going to give you a lot of failure. But there's another way of doing it. If at first you don't succeed, look at what you're doing. That's the educational part, is when we learn by our mistakes. And you're going to fail at everything. Let us say people who learn to code computers, which is a fairly sophisticated task to learn to do, they all fail at it. This is why they give something so simple like Hello World. That's the first program somebody writes because it's only one line, and most people screw it up a half a dozen times before they get one line of code right. So there's going to be a lot of failures in there, but in the process, you're going to learn a lot.
comment. One
Uh,
of my favorite quotes of all time. It's Nelson Mandela. He said, "I never lose. I win or I learn."
mm-hmm.
I love it.
Okay, so much for failure. It's just a matter of attitude. You see, your attitude is in there. You've got some sort of messages that if you fail at this, I'm going to bust your ass. And that niggle is there in the background saying, oh, I can't fail because something in my own mind is going to bust my ass. And you haven't had your ass busted since you were a child, even if then.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's not necessarily the fear of failure. It's that when it's about to do the task time, you warn yourself that you're going to punish yourself if you do fail, rather than warn yourself that you're going to congratulate yourself when you fail. Because the knowledge of failure is education. Failing and not knowing that we're failing because we're hiding from it, being angry and then denying that we're angry, or lying and then we deny that we're lying, is because we're afraid of failure.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're afraid of failure, that's going to keep us lying and it's going to keep us failing because we don't want to see it. But when we're just okay with failure, then we can look at it and learn and see. But we have to start changing the attitude, and the way that we change the attitude is by changing each individual thought. So when you have thoughts of, oh no, something bad's going to happen when I fail, the answer to that is it's already happened. That thought was preventing you from doing what you wanted to do. And it brought in fear. So here you are, you want to do this, the child wants to do that, and the parent says, oh no, you don't do that, because if you do that, you'll fail at it, and then you'll be no good at it, and so you feel bad, and so now you have already the results of failure, and you haven't even tried it yet. You haven't even done it yet. You haven't failed yet at doing the task. You failed before you started because of what you told yourself about it.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the thoughts that we have to start becoming aware of. And once we become aware of those thoughts, we can change them. And the very first change that we want to put in there is the one that the Buddha would recommend, and that is, aha, I see you. Aha, I see that parent in my mind. He used it in the expression, aha, I see you, Mara. Now, Mara is a word that can mean many, many things. It's often used as devil. It can be used as the world. It could be as society, or it could be used as thought. But in all cases, the devil is in one's mind. Okay? So, aha, I see you, Mara, is the same thing as I see that failing thought, or aha, I see that thought that brings on fear.
Mm-hmm.
Aha, I see you. That's the wake up. Okay, so we have to remember to investigate. The investigation comes to, aha, I see what's going on. We make a distinguishment, we make a determination. The next thing is to take the right the right effort. And the right effort is to change that thought from an unwholesome thought to a wholesome thought. Now, as we develop the skill of this, we get more discerning. Thoughts that we used to think were okay to have, now we begin to see that they too have an unwholesome quality and they're therefore not worth of having. So let's go to the other end of the scale and talk about thoughts that we know for sure are wholesome and are not unwholesome at all. And so we can use the distinguishment between that, because there's a whole lot of thoughts in the middle there. And those thoughts that are in the middle, we can call junk thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Junk thoughts are the kind of thoughts that we like to have, but we don't recognize the danger in them. And one junk thought after another junk thought will often lead to an unwholesome thought. But if we keep thoughts at a level of wholesome and we know they're wholesome, then they don't generally deteriorate into junk thoughts. So thoughts that we know of that can be considered either junk thoughts or unwholesome would be thoughts that about things that do not exist right here, right now. So if we are having thoughts about, ain't it bad what's happening in Washington, D.C., or ain't it bad about what's happening in the White House, or ain't it bad about what's happening in the Florida White House? When we have those ain't it awful about things that are happening someplace else, we can automatically assume that those thoughts are unwholesome because they're not thoughts about what's happening right here, right now. That an important way of looking at it is to recognize how big our world is. The world of an infant is very, very small. Perhaps the world is only as big as a womb. And then the world is only as big as the arms that are holding the infant. And then the world is only as big as the bed that the baby is in. And then the world is only as big as the house he lives in. And then the child goes to school. Or maybe he goes out in the yard and plays, and now his world is as big as the yard. When he gets to school, now the school is part of the world that the child is in. But when he goes and has a geography lesson, something weird happens. Now he's given the definition of a world that does not exist. He's given maps and globes, and he's given names and places and things like that that he has never been, and they don't mean anything. They're only mental conjectures. As we grow up in adults, then we think that the world is big and wide, and we're told it's wonderful, but it really appears dangerous. But that kind of world is a conceptualized world. The real world that you live in is in the world of your senses, which means that your world ends when your sight ends. Your world of hearing ends with the things that you can hear, and the things that you cannot hear are not part of your world. If you understand the world this way, then we can understand expressions like "may all beings be happy" is an expression that's taken from some practices of metta. But when we understand the 6 points of the compass correctly as a metaphor, then we understand how limited the world really is. Where Western ideals about the 6 points of the compass, east, west, north, south, up, and down, just keeps going and going and going. They're just arrows, and it just goes and goes and goes, right? But in the time of the Buddha, these 6 points of the compass actually were a metaphor to mean something. The people to my left are my friends. The people to my right are my family. The people in front of me are the folks that I do business with. The people behind me are the ones who are trying to stab me in the back. The ones above me are my authorities, like teachers and priests and psychologists and politicians and bosses. And the people below me are the people who serve me, in the sense of sometimes family members will take on that point of service, or our employees, or even if we walk into a drugstore and ask for a particular medicine, the person behind the counter is now your servant. That's their job, to serve you. Okay. All of the people then that are associated with us, the ones above us, the ones below us, the ones in front, the ones behind, the ones left, and the ones that are right, are all within our visual auditory field. Our world is small. And the way that we then start to live our lives is to keep our lives in our world and to stop going out of the world. Right? The world of the senses is the world. So the worlds of Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden are not in our world. They have their own world they live in.
They
There's
do.
a world called Fox News, and there's a world of CNN, and those are their own worlds, and they are not the world that I live in. There is no CNN here until I put it up on the computer, and then it becomes part of my world because I can see it. So really what we're saying is that when we talk about and think about the world that is outside of the senses, basically we're talking about conceptualizations, which are actually inside the mind, which means now that we actually have two kinds of worlds. We have an interior world and we have an exterior world, the world of senses.
I think Anya went to the exterior world.
Who?
I- There you go. Maybe I should see my pup here. He's in.
Can you hear me?
He's having a good time. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I had to charge my phone. My phone is almost dead.
Okay. We were talking about now we have two worlds. We have the world of the senses, and then we have a mentally constructed world. Those are the two worlds. The world that we mentally construct may or may not be out there someplace. That in fact, when I talk about Putin having his own world and Biden having his own world, we can also talk about Rumpelstiltskin. Except that Rumpelstiltskin's world is a world that I've made up in my own mind. Just like the world of Biden is a world that I've made up in my own mind. Just like the world of Putin, I made up in my own mind because I don't have any clue about the real world of Putin. I've made it up. We live in a world of concepts. And what we're talking about here is that when you're going to live in the world, the real world, you've got to live in the world of your senses. This is why I like the phrase, wake up and smell the coffee. While we're asleep, we can't smell the coffee. When we do wake up, the smelling of the coffee is actually being in our olfactory senses. We're actually experiencing something that's real. The smell of the coffee is real. So this whole way of looking at the world now is to wake up and smell the coffee, or to wake up and get into our senses and come out of our conceptualizations, because it's that conceptualizing world that you find dangerous. The real world that you live in right here, right now, is not dangerous. Look around. I mean, all three of you, just look and recognize that you're safe right now. The reality is that everything is okay right now. And that's the reality.
Everything's fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, he's the winner. He knows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you see, the dogs don't spend much time, very little time, in conceptualizations. They spend all of their time in the real world.
Absolutely.
But the distinction is that the dogs also live in the real world of their own instincts, in the sense that the dog can perceive something as dangerous because they saw it, to where in fact it's not dangerous. They don't have that wisdom faculty to figure out what's real and what's not real. You can do that. That's when the frontal cortex is coming into play. We use it often, but we don't use it often enough. They say, I have heard, you probably heard this many years ago, that people only use 10% of their brain. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
A much better way of saying it is that they use the the temporal lobe and the anterior cortex all the time, 100%, but they only use the frontal cortex about 5 to 10% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that we don't use the power of the mind, it's that we don't at all, or only 10% of the power. So many people think of that as that that the voltage is on, but it's only at 10%. And what I'm saying is, no, it's at full voltage, but it's only on full voltage occasionally, and that most of the time we live in a blackout because we're not paying attention to what's going on. This is the practice of anapanasati, is to wake up and be here now, to wake up and be in this present moment, to wake up and realize that everything right now is not just okay and safe, but everything right now is marvelous. Then in fact, your next breath is absolutely delicious. You can't live without the next breath, and yet we take it for granted. And some people say, well, why should I even like breathing? And the answer to that is, if you don't like breathing, then stop doing it and don't do it until you like it. And pretty soon you'll like it. But normally it's done on automatic pilot, and then the automatic pilot is very, very conservative. And we want to live a rich life, not a conservative life, which means we have to remember to come out of our conservatism and intentionally live a life that's liberal. That you could go so far as to say that even in politics, liberals can think, conservatives feel. Conservatives are in a state of danger, they're in a state of instinctual knowledge, and that they vote and they live their lives that way, full of misery, disgust, anger, separation, tribalism. All of those human characteristics were built into our DNA and fostered in childhood. But what we're practicing here is, no, it's time for us to grow up and be fully adult and not spend time in our instincts. Let's not do it by automatic pilot anymore, because my automatic pilot keeps crashing my plane into the sides of mountains here and there, as well as having a lot of turbulence. And so, using our wisdom, using our frontal cortex, waking up and actually smelling the coffee and seeing what's there, and recognizing that life is actually quite marvelous. So that means that this is not an aspiration. We do not have to talk ourselves into believing that life is marvelous, and then we start thinking so. It's rather that we wake up and actually see for sure that it really is marvelous. The world is a wonderful place. You know that deep down inside, otherwise you'd have killed yourself years ago. No, we cling to life because we know that it's marvelous and it's wonderful. We just can't find the marvelous, wonderful part of it when we keep doing the ways that we've done in the past, which is the way we were trained, which is our programming. So we have actually two things, and we have the basic original programming. We can think of that as the boot system. And then we have the learned behavior, which is the programming that we would call an application or an operating system. And that what we can do is to change that programming. How do we change the programming? Every thought is a program. We can change the way we think by changing each thought we think. When we remember to change the thoughts from unwholesome to wholesome thoughts. So as I promised you before, let's give a set of wholesome thoughts that we know are 100% wholesome. Not a doubt about it. Wholesome thought number one: everything's all right. Everything's fine. Not a worry in the world. That's a wholesome thought. And it's true. When you're not worried about anything. Goenka has a phrase, never mind, start again. This is used in the sense of when students do wake up. He's talking about basically when the mind wanders away from the breath, and we wake up and recognize that the mind has wandered away from the breath, come back to the breath. Most students don't do that. Most students, when the mind wanders away from the breath and they recognize it, they punish themselves, just like they always do. They punish themselves with a thought, oh, monkey mind, oh, meditation is hard, oh, there I go again, losing track of what I was doing. This is hard work, monkey mind, out of control. And we punish ourselves when we recognize that the mind has wandered away. What we need to do instead is congratulate ourselves for the fact that we recognize that the mind has wandered away, because it all our lives has been wandering and wandering and wandering and wandering and wandering and wandering. Nothing new here, folks. That's what it's always been doing. But when people start to practice meditation, now they give themselves the hassles that their mind has been wandering away when it's just doing what it's always done. So now we found in our meditation, our new meditation is to feel bad about something we used to not feel bad about. Is that going in the right direction or what? No, we have to immediately, when we wake up, the waking up is to recognize that the mind has wandered away. And that's an aha, I see you. Aha, I caught you. Aha, I see you, Mara. I see that mind has wandered away. And we immediately start changing our attitude into the attitude of a winner. Aha, I can see you. This is the statement that comes out of the adult. The statement of, there you go again, the mind's wandered away, bunky mind, that's the statement that comes out of the parent. That's the parent that's talking. That's learned behavior. We learned that from our in our childhood. Some teacher or somebody says that, you're not paying attention to what we're talking about here, kid. Stop daydreaming. And the child remembers that. And when the child becomes a meditator years later, he plays that trick on himself that was played on him by the teacher. So what we need to do then is to start changing the way we think by changing each little thought. So when we wake up to recognize that the mind has wandered away from the breath, we can say, hot diggity dog, I caught it again. I'm getting pretty good at this. 3 times this year, I've caught the mind wandering away from the breath. Someday I'll get it up to 3 times a day.
That's very aspirational.
What was that, Robert?
That's very aspirational.
No, it's based on reality. I can do it now. I can do it again. I can do it again. That's the reality of it. In fact, that's not aspirational. That's building confidence. Over and over again, we want to build that confidence up. I can do that. It's not someday my prince will come. This hot diggity dog, I just caught him. Here he comes. And instead of asking him, where have you been all this time? I've been waiting for you. You made me feel so bad. I've been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. Where the hell have you been, Mr. Prince? Someday my prince will come. And when he comes, I'm going to give him hell because he's been so late. A better thing to say is that when my prince will come, I'm going to congratulate him for playing. I'm so glad to see you. So when we wake up and we recognize that the mind has wandered away from the breath, we can say, oh, I'm so glad to see you. Wow, great. This is real. And so we start counting on that reality, that real stuff, not aspiration. I could do this. I could do this. But that I can do this attitude has to have a base. And the basis is actual success. But you were successful the first time you did it. As soon as you remembered that the mind wandered away from the breath and you came back to the breath, that's success. I did it that time. I took a deep breath. I stopped thinking about Aunt Susie and started thinking about this present moment. Because Aunt Susie is not real. Aunt Susie does not exist because she's not standing in front of me arguing with me. When she's standing in front of me and arguing with me, only now is she real. The rest of the time, she's only a mental concept. So this is a way of looking at it, the here now. What can be done in your world of your senses, not the conceptualized world that doesn't exist. So that means that unwholesome thoughts would be thoughts of the past, thoughts of the future, thoughts about undone work that you're not doing right now, thoughts about writing an email. If you have a thought of, oh, I got to write that email, and then you say, hot diggity dog, I'm going to do it right now, and we write the email, and then it's done. But how many times do we do that? We think about that email. I don't want to do that email. You ought to go do that email. I don't want to do that email. And then 10 minutes later, you ought to go write that email. I don't want to do that email. And look how many times we think about do that email, and we haven't done it yet. And all that time we've been feeling bad because we really didn't want to do it anyway. But as Robert was pointing out, we can get ourselves into the point that we do actually want to write that email. We can get excited about it. And then we can do it. We can do it with joy. Whatever thy hand findeth to do, do it with all of thy heart. Put your heart into it. Put some skin in the game. Okay? Put some heart in it. Put some skin in the game. Let's put some mind into it, some real mind, some adult mind. This is the way that we do anything. A lot of people here, when I talk about going into seclusion and getting the mind straightened out, eventually it's possible for someone to get their mind so cleaned out that now they've got nothing to do. And so they can stay in bed all day. But even those who can stay in bed all day, they generally don't. They generally find something to do and then they go do it. Nobody gets out of the bed without finding something to do. But I'm not saying don't do anything. I'm saying wait until you get your mind really in a good state and then go do anything you want to do, so long as you maintain the mind in a good state. You can start writing that email with great exhilaration, get to a part about it that's hard. Another thing to do is to write the email and then don't send it. This is an old trick that's been done for a long time. In fact, one of the points about Abraham Lincoln, those who are Abraham Lincoln fans know that many of the presidential letters that he wrote stayed in the desk. They did not get sent out. Why? Because he reviewed them to recognize that these weren't worthy of me, and so he didn't send them. That's the way to do it, is go ahead and write the email with the intention to just let it rip. But you're not going to send that email out. Get that off your chest, and then a couple of days later, write the kind of email that you know will be well received.
There's a great saying from Abraham Lincoln. This is another of my favorites. It's give me 8 hours to cut down a tree, and I'll spend the first 6 sharpening the axe.
And even with the sharp axe, it takes 2 hours to cut down a tree. That's a big tree.
Yeah.
And it takes them 6 hours? What's wrong with that axe? It must be an old one.
Yeah.
So another way of doing it, I'm going to just sit down and relax for 6 hours, take 5 minutes to sharpen the axe, and then wait another hour and a half, and then
There you go.
So this is a way of looking at it, is these are the 4 points of the Eightfold Noble Path that most people, they hear it in a formalized set and not recognize what a powerful tool this is. They just hear it as almost a list. Yeah, the Eightfold Noble Path is right view and right sati and right effort and right, this, that, and the other thing. And it doesn't mean anything. But the actual practice of anapanasati is putting this Eightfold Noble Path into practice, to wake up, to investigate the mind, to gladden the mind, to put unwholesome thoughts out of the mind and put wholesome thoughts in the mind. And the wholesome thoughts would be, everything's okay, everything's fine. Others like, no place to go and nothing to do, and the spring comes and the grass grows by itself. There is also in Jesus Christ Superstar, there is a song that's quite noble. It's sung by Mary Magdalene when she says, try not to get worried, try not to get upset, everything's okay now, or whatever the song. Everything's all right. Yes, everything's fine. That's the song. Everything's all right. Everything's fine.
I like the way you sing.
This is the way that we live our lives. Everything is okay. Everything is fine. We do not have to worry about fixing the broken conceptualized world because it's conceptualized in our own minds anyway. That the actual real world out there is not part of your world. The world of Canada, the world of Putin, the world of South Africa, those worlds are worlds for those people. They're not your world. And it's time that we start living in our own world, which means living in the world of the senses, not living in worlds of conceptions. Because conceptions, you can conceive all kinds of dangers. The reality is that there is nothing to be fearful of. Everything's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You have to remember, though, that's sati. Keep remembering, keep remembering, keep remembering. Everything's okay. Keep watching the thoughts that you have and start putting wholesome thoughts in the mind over and over and over again. This needs to be repeated. It's repetition is the key. No one learns to play a musical instrument without repetition. That's the key. In fact, you don't learn any skill without repetition. So it's not that we, when I say you have spent your whole life repeatedly talking yourself into feeling bad. Now it's time to repeatedly talk yourself into feeling good, intentionally so, with right, noble wisdom. And so we begin to look at what is wholesome and what is not wholesome. Things that are not here now, not necessarily wholesome at all. Things that are here are right now, those things are real. And reality is pretty wholesome. Concepts are mixed bag. Coming out of our conceptualized world into the reality that you live in, into what you can see, what you can hear, what you can taste, what you can feel. Those things are not dangerous. Things are marvelous. All you have to do is remember that. To remember what's real. That memory, that sati, to remember, to start repeating over and over again. All of music and all of dance is based upon repetition. just like marching armies is based upon repetition. Up, 2, 3, 4, up, 2, 3, 4, step after step, except there you're doing it because you are told to do it, not because you want to. But here we can think of that life is actually a dance. Life is not a march. But dancing is also repetitive. Music is repetitive. The examples that I use, I've got lots of examples. My favorite is the girl from Ipanema. Da 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 da. You hear that? Repeating over and over and over and over again the same notes, or actually the same kind of notes in that sequence, but the sounds or the frequency of the notes change. The same thing is true with Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the first movement. Da 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 da. Now that's the only thing that's in that whole song. There is no place that they play something else. But Beethoven was a master at taking those four notes and repeating them over and over and over and over again. Da 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 da. It's just over and over and over again. So this is the key now. This is how you're going to start practicing Anapanasati, is by repeating it over and over and over and over again. You have literally spent your whole life teaching and repeating to yourself all of these unwholesome thoughts. You've been talking yourself into feeling bad all these years. Now it's time to change and to start talking yourself into feeling good. You can do it. And you know you can do it. And the more you do it, the more confidence you'll do it. And pretty soon you'll have the idea. And this is a major milestone, this thing that I'm about to say here. The Buddha said that when the student comes to the point of saying that it does not matter how obstructed the mind gets, no matter what kind of bad mood that I'm in, or no matter what it presents itself to the mind, I can throw that stuff out and be in the reality of the moment. I could be here now and see the truth of it. So this is actually a step along the path. This is, in fact, the first step of noble. This step is noble in the sense that it's super mundane, it's a part of the path, but this is not held by ordinary people. Ordinary people do not know that they can come out of their own misery. This is a noble state, to know that no matter what happens, I can come out of this and be in a good state right now. I could be here now. So here's some examples. One would be for ordinary people: when they get sick, they feel bad. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa says getting sick is an opportunity to practice. Hey, the body's sick, but I'm not. Hey, the body needs some help right now. Let's give it the help it needs. But most people have a pity party when they get sick. Oh, I don't feel like it. Another example would be tooling down the highway, and the red lights and the siren blows and the cop is behind, and most people freak out. They see the cop as an authority. They don't see that, in fact, it's possible that when the cop stops you, that you wind up recognizing that this guy is your next door neighbor. And you knew he was a cop all along, but when you saw him in the back, you saw generalized cop. But you don't see him as a friend until you recognize him. But the point is that this guy who's dressed in a blue suit, who has just, gone through this stop, is your good friend already anyway. The reality of the situation is that I can handle this situation with my good friend. There's no problem here. But most people will freak out. They'll become afraid. They'll start behaving afraid. The cop picks up on the fear. The cop becomes afraid. And the next thing you know, this whole thing is going to go downhill because everybody's feeling bad. But you, when the cop stops, you can say, "Hi, officer. I'm glad to see you're out on duty. What can I do for you? I want to help you." And change the whole attitude about it, and it'll be a good time. But most people don't deal with cops that way because they deal with cops the way that they saw cops dealt with on TV or the way that Daddy treated cops. When Daddy got stopped by the cops, he freaked out. Therefore, when I get stopped by the cops, I got to freak out too. I got to do it the way that Daddy did. That was my learned behavior. So these are examples of times when people freak out, when there's no reason to freak out at all. None at all. But we do it because of our habits. And the answer to that is wakey, wakey. That's the real issue. Wakey, wakey. Where can we get that wake up call? That's why we want to develop the skill of sati. We want to practice it over and over and over and over and over again. That's the number one thing to repeat, is to remember to take a deep breath, to remember to throw unwholesome thoughts out and bring wholesome thoughts in. And so when those really heavy duty unwholesome thoughts come in, like getting arrested, being in handcuffs, sitting in the back of a squad car with our hands locked behind us, most people have unwholesome thoughts at those points because they don't have the skill to remember that, hey, everything's okay. I'm getting a free ride.
All right, I have a question.
Yes.
So do you have any so let's say, like, for particularly nagging unwholesome thoughts, like let's say a particular ex-girlfriend just keeps coming up all the time. You just
The
keep
answer to
thinking
that,
about this and you
Keyshawn
keep
knows
throwing
all
it
about
out.
this.
Yeah.
Keyshawn knows all about this. This is what you do with that. You actually can do this with, actual to-do list that people have, short to-do list in their mind, or they have a to-do list of things to do,
Yeah.
right? Well, now is the time to have a don't do list. Okay. And the top of the list is ex-girlfriends. Don't do ex-girlfriends in the mind. Keep that as one of the items of the don't do list. You don't need many items on the don't do list because once you practice doing that, you don't do it anymore. It doesn't need to be on the list anymore. So the list has items that come and go. So today, you don't do this. But tomorrow, you don't have to have that on your don't do list because it's old news now.
Mhm.
Okay.
Sure.
An example of don't do list would be go to the bank. Now, you got to go to the bank, but many people, when they go to the bank a dozen times in their mind before they actually go to the bank. Over and over and over again, we think about going to the bank, but we don't go to the bank. Well, now you can put going to the bank on my don't do list. But then tomorrow I actually go to the bank. And so I'm not thinking about going to the bank anymore. So I don't have to have a don't do list for going to the bank. We only put items on the don't do list that are something that we're most likely to do right now if we're not watching. So you can take that don't do list and paste it on the refrigerator and paste it on the couch and paste it over the face of your TV. You can put it on your laptop so that you can't see the screen, and it has that great big don't do list. Ex-girlfriends right there on that list. And you remind yourself over and over and over again about the don't do list. So when thoughts of girlfriends come up, aha, that's on the don't do list. Aha, I caught you, girlfriend. Out you go. No thoughts of that girlfriend.
Dhammarato, I have a question. Do you ever not have any unwholesome thoughts now?
That's an unwholesome question. Why is that an unwholesome question? It's automatically unwholesome because it has the concept of always in it. We don't
Oh,
live in an always. We live in a right now. So the question would be, right now, do you have unwholesome thoughts? Nope, not right now.
so thoughts don't really change. You just, the recognition of them changes.
Yeah, the waking up to them changes. We're not trying to be perfect. We're trying to feel good right now. Your question is based in perfectionism,
Well,
alwaysism, off into the futurisms.
you see, so problematic.
Never mind, start again. Come back to the here now. In fact, that's that's an item to put on your don't do list. Just the word always. Take the word always and put it on your don't do list. Take the word should and could and put those on your don't do list. Another one would be try, because the word try has failure built into it.
Yeah.
If the therapist recommends something to the client and the client says, I'll try, the therapist automatically knows that he's going to fail in it. But we don't ever we don't ever say, I'll try when we intend to do it.
Yeah.
We intend to try and fail at it so that we can at least get off the hook. So trying, should, would, could, and always are words that are basically parent ego state kind of words. They're dangerous, and we should put them on the don't do list. Now, what is on our to-do list? Well, that to-do list actually is an item that belongs on the don't do list. Because mostly the to-do list is coming out of the parent anyway. You should do these things. In other words, we need to learn to enjoy our life rather than see life as work to do. How can you make your life a joy, a pleasure, a dance, a Leela? Every object of work can turn into an object of play when we have a playful attitude. And a playful attitude is either an attitude that there's no results there, or the attitude is that, yeah, but the results are always marvelous. So there's either no results, just play, or the result is marvelous. So if the laptop is broken and I'm playing with it and it continues broken, I'm just playing with it. But if it's broken and I play with it in a way of getting it working, now that's success. But there was no failure in there anywhere. I was just playing. Just playing with that broken laptop. Yesterday, I got a 10-year-old laptop going by playing with it.
That's why you're talking about it.
That's why I'm talking about it now, right? But that's our attitude, is that we learn to play with things rather than seeing everything as big and powerful and important. So that's another word that you can put on your don't do list, the word important. Nothing is important. You just do things because they need to be done. And you can enjoy doing them. If it's really important that I go get my visa to stay in Thailand, then everything about going to the visa office, everything about immigration is going to be work because it's so important. I've got to get this visa. But if I go just to play, then while I'm playing, the visa will happen. I may have to play there a long time, but I'm just playing. And so you can put the word important. When things stop being important, When they're important, we have to work at it. When there's nothing important, then we can just play with everything. Let your life become a joy. But we have to repeat this over and over again because it is a natural tendency to work and to feel bad and to do what we're told to do and to resent it and to make things important. We got a lot of woulds and shoulds and coulds, and so we try and fail. So you're not going to fail anymore because there's nothing important for you to fail at. That all you're doing is playing anyway. So just play with your life. And when you get tired of playing with something, then set it aside and go play with something else. Now that's the winner's attitude. You can handle anything. You can play, you can turn anything into a toy. One of the very few things that was wise that my dad said, but he meant it in a kind of different way than the way that I'm telling it now. But what he said was, work, I'm not afraid of work. I can lay down beside work and take a nap. Not afraid of it all.
He said, I can lay down aside work.
Yeah, you can just lay down beside the work and take a nap. He's
Beside
talking
the
about
work.
work in the sense of digging a ditch. He was
I got
a pipeline layer. And so him, work would be digging a ditch, right?
Got
And
it.
he's not afraid of digging that ditch. You can lay right down beside that ditch and the digger and all of that stuff, take a nap. Or he can play. He can play with a ditch digger. And if he plays a while, you'll dig a ditch with it. It's a matter of an attitude. You call it work, it is work. You call it play, it becomes play.
So we ought to look for a game, not for a job.
Well, if you can enjoy this moment, then you can apply this moment's joy to your job. And in that case, it's no longer a job. It's just an activity. It's just play.
Yes, I get it.
It's an attitude change. But the whole world's attitude gives us these kind of words. Work, job. What does the word work and the word job have as a connotation to it? Something that we don't want to do, something that is difficult, something that we may fail at, and it's something that if we fail at, we'll get punished. It's a really bad thing. This is important. When we change our attitude about it, it's, so the carpenter, an example, if the carpenter sees this new order that's come in as a bunch of work, then he'll build that table and chairs, but he won't enjoy his life. If the next carpenter comes by and he sees that order coming in for the table and chairs, he says, hot dog, I know what I'm going to do with this. And he has a ball. Guess who builds the better furniture? The guy with the attitude that this is fun and I'm having a ball, or the attitude that this is work. Oftentimes the client has something to do with that. In other words, if the old grumpy businessman comes in and wants tables and chairs, more than likely the carpenter is going to get that grumpiness and build that grumpiness for his client right into the furniture. If the client is, let us say, a representative of the king, and they want something really fancy, and they leave it to you, then hot diggity dog, I get to do the fanciest thing I've ever done. And now it winds up being a major piece of art. And it all had to do with the attitude of the guy who took the order. And that attitude remained through the work. So when you get an order for something to do, are you going to treat it like an opportunity? Hot diggity dog, I'm going to have fun doing this, or you're going to treat it like it's a lot of work to do? Up to you. It's just a matter of attitude.
Mhm.
And if you have the attitude, I'd rather sit on my butt than do that work, then let's do that instead. I don't really have to build any tables anymore. I've built enough tables already. Now I'm going to sit down and relax. They call that retirement. But most people don't retire. Most guys, and in fact, I've seen quite a lot of this. I've got an extra story about it. This happened at Sunoco Products. Sunoco is not Sun Oil Company. This is the Sunoco in South Carolina that makes packaging, like Mars bars. They make Pringle cans. In the corporate offices there, they have the walls lined with pictures of retired employees, because this is a small town in South Carolina. Once somebody goes to work at that plant for at 20 years old, they stay working at that plant until they're 65, they retire. And on all of these photos and all of this hall of ex-employees, they had both the retirement date and the death date. And guess what? The death date generally comes within a year or two after the retirement date. These guys don't retire and live a wonderful life. They retire and they die because their identity is in the work. Their identity is in the job. Now, the story goes is that for a while that got suspended because there was one of the employees, when he retired, he actually started up a Harley Davidson dealership that had a, let us say, a den or a cozy lounge in the back of the place, so that the old men in Hartsville, South Carolina could not only just buy motorcycles or come, they had a community.
Mhm.
They had something to do. And the group that joined this could last for another 10 or 15 years after they retired. But most of the people would die right after they retire because they've got nothing left to do. So if you see your job as you've got to work and work and work and work and work and then finally retire, when you finally retire, now you've got nothing to do and you don't even know how to enjoy your life because you've been working your whole life. That's very common. It's so common that it's remarkable. The psychologists know all about this. You have to plan your retirement carefully. But the best way to plan your retirement is by enjoying your life before you retire, so that you'll know how to enjoy life when you do retire. And if you're really good at it, you can retire right now.
Bingo.
Bingo. Just retire.
I'm done.
Had enough of it already. Yeah, that's the way. That's the attitude. Is I'm retired. I'm out of here. Take a hike.
I'm gonna go take a hike.
Okay. Well, let's finish this conversation now and give each one opportunity, I guess, to join that other call.
Mhm.
Do you have any questions? Does anybody have any questions?
I have questions, but they're not related to this topic, so we could maybe save them for the other call.
Let's wait it later.
Yeah, I have exhausted mine, but thank you very much. I'm so happy to be a part of this.
Well, it's not me, it's Dhamma.
I...
Listen, you can get joy from any clown.
Right.
If you've got the right attitude.
Hey. Well, thank you again.
And then you can become your own clown.
I think just one small question. So earlier, Anya asked, she said the thoughts don't change, just the ability to respond to them. But isn't it true that you get good at putting in all these wholesome thoughts, and so it just becomes wholesome?
It's a
or
new
not
habit.
Much?
It's a new
Yeah.
habit. The
The
habits.
thoughts do change. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The old habit. And a clear example of that is, imagine that you've got pavement, sidewalk, streets. and that there is a weed growing up in the crack. In order to remove that weed, you would have to dig up the whole sidewalk. That's not a good idea, but you can take care of that weed simply by cutting it off when it comes above ground or when it comes up onto the sidewalk. If you keep whacking that weed off at the surface, it never gets any leaves, it never gets any nourishment, and the roots will wither and die, and pretty soon it won't put up any shoots anymore. With that analogy, you can see then that you cannot uproot the weeds of these unwholesome thoughts, but you can whack the weed off every time it comes up.
That's a great analogy.
You whack it off right here, right now. Don't worry about the root. The roots will take care of themselves.
Yeah. Oh, well,
Great.
thank you. That's a great start of the morning here.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, Keyshawn, we'll see you in a minute. We'll go join that other call if it's still on.
Okay.
All right, bye, guys. Thank you again.
Great.
Nice.
All right. See you guys over there. All right.
Okay.
Cheers.
Okay. Should we try and